Well, last week I reviewed The Bad Guys, DreamWorks movie loosely adapted from a children's series and heavily inspired by Lupin the Third and anime in general. It was a good and fun movie with some nasty problems in the second half, but it did well enough, so a sequel was downright inevitable. So, is this sequel as good as the original? Better? Let's find out. So, what is it about? The Bad Guys 2 is a DreamWorks animation movie loosely based on a book series of the same name written by Aaron Blabey. It features the return of the same voice cast and director from the original movie, although it distances itself further from their source material. Sometime after the events of the first movie, the bad guys are reformed into the good guys, and also they are completely miserable, since no one will give them a chance or a job. Wolf is getting closer to Governor Diane Foxington, visiting her every week to spar, but they cannot be together due to Wolf being an ex-con, and making things worse, the good guys are being blamed by a new string of robberies perpetrated by the Phantom Bandit. In hopes of getting into the good graces of society, the good guys team up with old Missy Luggins, now commissioner, in order to clear the names by catching Kitty Cat, voiced by Danielle Brooks, said Phantom Bandit, and her helpers, Pigtail, voiced by Maria Bakalova, and Doom, voiced by Natasha Lyonne. What are the plans of this Phantom Bandit? Will the good guys clear their names? Visuals. Right from the get-go, you can see the immense leap in visuals in only 3 years of development. The character models are still simple by themselves, still with a more Play-Doh impression, so most of the improvements come from model textures, now you can see clearly strands of hair and fur, model colors such as a blushed skin, light effects and more elaborated background. And oh boy, sadly I can't show the best moments due to spoilers, it's a thing of beauty. They really cranked up the light effects here. Photography also got better, since now you have some pretty establishing shots and stills, which also shows that directing is still efficient but improving. A new addition are sudden shifts into 2D and anime, but that only happens twice. This time around, there are less direct references to anime, at least as far as I could tell, although there is the usual attention to detail. Design-wise, most characters keep it simple, and didn't change much from their previous designs with the exception of Luggins. Her shift into full Zenigata took a step further since now she sports his coat. The new additions are also good and simple. Kitty focuses on dark clothes and an enlarged upper torso to show brutality. Pigtail is the big gal, but her round design shows that she is goofier than the rest, and Susan is a simple crow with purple makeup effects to draw femininity. Again, simple and straightforward. And simple is good. At worst, Susan's design bothers me a bit because of the angle of her beak. During some scenes, in order to not show her beak front first, the animation shifts in as if it was glued on the left side of her head and angling to the right. Yet sometimes it's animated correctly. This is just a minor gripe and it won't be a problem. Something that will end up to personal tastes is Kitty Cat's design ends up more urbane, almost military, while she was originally meant to be a more of a god punk. I'm neutral to it, so overall, nothing but improvements in the visuals. Acting. The first movie had an interesting style regarding to frame rate. Whenever it needed a more intimate or calmer scene where characters were just talking, it went smoothly, but whenever there was action on screen, it broke down. Thus, the frame rate ended up being used as a metronome for what was happening on screen. Here, it's the same thing, but there is an obvious tighter control in the animation allied to a bump in resources making things far smoother. This is starting to get a bit repetitive, but yeah, everything here is an improvement as well over the original. The same focus on body language, expressions and small motions, such as sudden jerks of ears to simulate realism, hand movements, everything is still here and smoothed out. Since this time it seems that DreamWorks isn't competing against itself. It is still the high spot of the movie alongside the added effects. Sadly, since there is a lesser focus on Snake and things he likes to eat, there aren't as many animalistic moments. Combat scenes got at the same time more intense and chaotic. The camera got far more dynamic, floating from point to point during a brawl, this time in a corridor motion, meaning instead of spinning around a specific spot, it will run back and forth from character to character as if it was a corridor. Honestly, it's not much my style, but that's a personal preference. What matters is that you can clearly see what's going on, the choreographies are actually quite smooth for a cartoon, just like the previous movie, and the Dragon Ball and Shonen inspirations pop up with violent impacts full of power. Smooth, smooth, smooth. I keep repeating this, it almost feels like a made-up word. Smooth. Writing. Now, the first movie had some interesting ideas with a three-folded execution, kinda like a Neapolitan ice cream. You had the chocolate of the heists, the more bland but straightforward bad people learn to be good drama, vanilla, and then the messy strawberry of an ending. Nobody likes the Neapolitan strawberry, shut up. Here, it feels as if the majority of the strawberry was removed, and the chocolate and vanilla ended blended, making it a chocolate flake ice cream. It's better in the overall sense, but some things were lost when both flavors were mixed, and there are still some big problems, but that's for later. The movie starts with a flashback of the bad guys in the glory days stealing what would be Wolf's signature car. Technically, you could exit this part of the movie since its major purpose was to establish one person who will show up later, and it may feel a bit out of place since the vast majority of the movie happens in the USA, but this is a totally awesome well-written sequence, so I don't give a slight shred of a It's really good to establish our protagonists, to show how the bad guys were happy in their heists and how Wolf operates in a smooth clockwork precision with room for lots of improvisation, how he is a superb driver and set the tone of the movie, and the whiplash between the days of yore and their days after getting out of prison is really good. Now, the first problems start to show up, but this is mostly for people who pay attention and try to overanalyze stuff like me. The vast majority of viewers probably won't care. The bad guys are suffering a lot because no one wants to hire them due to the past. This already demands some suspension of disbelief because there are many stories of notorious criminals, be them hackers like Tarantula or master thieves like Wolf, that were immediately hired by security firms the second they stepped out of prison. The chief of police says on TV that once a con, always a con, which could end with a nasty lawsuit, but okay, let's pretend for a second that this is all feasible and move on. Wolf visits Diane for a weekly spar and things get a bit worse. In the first movie, Diane only fired barbs whenever Wolf got too cheeky. Here, it feels as if the writers tried to make them more casual with each other and missed their hand by having her fire heavier insults unprompted. He tells her about how hard things are, and I loved how she admitted that compared to them, her transition from a life of crime was easy, although that Wolf was getting faster. Yet, in order to push the good guys into miserable beings to set up the temptations for later, the narrative makes Diane basically tells him,
I know it's tough, but you can't lose hope, okay? People do want to trust you. You just have to give them a reason.
Those aren't good points. Rubbing salt in the wound, the narrative won't let her accept Wolf's affections because he is an ex-con and she's the governor, and her parting words to Wolf are,
I would work on that right hook. It feels a little like I'm getting kissed by a butterfly.
Jesus
Catch
Christ,
you later,
lady,
tough
he's
guy.
already miserable enough. This interaction put a bitter taste in my mouth because it basically throws the ball at the bad guy's court and piles it up against them when it shouldn't be such, thus making society look like a villain that can't and won't be faulted. In the previous movie, they willingly surrender themselves, spend their time in jail, released early for good behavior. It's society's duty to give them a chance. And Diane is the governor. She could push for rehabilitation programs or simply hire them on the spot as her security team or a consultant team. And by making Diane brush off Wolf due to him being an ex-con, the narrative makes society be even worse. After all, if not for its pressure, they'd be already destroying a room or two, thus basically reinforcing the stigma from the first movie that pushed the bad guys into villainy in the first place. The lesson ends being society will quickly judge you for your appearances, cast you out, and if you fight it or rebel, it will crush you punish you, and if you want redemption, you have to be heroes to defend it. Those are harsh, but really interesting themes that could have been used to build a gripping story for a less whimsical movie, and only if handled with utmost care. Since Bad Guys 2 is a fast-paced comedic heist movie, all these themes will be discarded, at most just use it as the reason why the good guys seek to work to find the Phantom Bandit. I heard that the original plan was to give the good guys miserable, stable jobs, and honestly that would have worked far better as a middle ground from which the narrative could be built. Sure, being the bottom of the barrel underdogs may set for a more inspiring story, but by simply giving them jobs that sap their will to live, the narrative alleviates the pressure from the society and makes it look less villainous. Even better, by putting them through the grinder, you give them a reality check. This is how their victims lived. You give them a goal, improve to find happiness, an obstacle they can't improve till the rap sheet is cleared, and a question to answer. Is being accepted but far poorer is better than being isolated in the riches and success, quiet life, or blaze of glory? Perhaps Wolf works as a consultant for the bank, and the bank puts him on leave till the Phantom Bandit issue is solved due to not trusting him, etc. So this way you have the distrust, the theme of proving yourself, and you don't make society look like a bunch of miserable bastards, and thus too realistic. About his relationship with Diane could have been that he doesn't want to do the next step because he doesn't feel he's worthy of her. This will take the pressure off society, make him a bit more mature, and give him a go with expectations. Or just make them have an affair since they already look like 3 seconds from locking the nearest door. Again, this is mostly a personal opinion on the squeaky parts of the machine. This could have been ironed out or tweaked differently, but it doesn't make the movie bad. In fact, even with the subtle shifts and barbs, Wolf and Diane's chemistry is still enough and their interactions are still absolutely adorable.
Beija ela, miséria. Beija ela. Beija ela.
And the second part of the movie fares insanely better. Since there is no pile of players trying to out-gambit each other, the narrative got rid of one of the biggest problems in the first movie, and without it, pacing flows far smoother. There are only 2 players in the field. Our protagonists, the bad or good guys who just want to clear their names, and the Phantom Bandits and her crew who wants to frame them in order to pull a mysterious heist. Just like the first movie, said heist is actually well established beforehand, offering lots of bonuses for rewatches and or sharp eyes. You see clearly nearly every single piece of the puzzle before things happen, except the most important ones. To hunt the Phantom Bandit, the sort of good guys join up with the commissioner, and again, the highlight of both movies, the interactions and characterization, shines through. Their banter is funny, and their budding relationship is also endearing. Using this to hop to characterization, it's at the same time solid, but not as developed as the first movie. Due to this flick being far more focused on action, there are far less opportunities for characters to sit down and talk, so there is less development and fleshing out. Personalities are roguely unchanged. Mr. Wolf is still the lovable cocky rogue that is absolutely one of the best and knows it. This time, we got to see him out of his comfort zone, where he is more hesitant and desperate, and I do enjoy the disparity. On the other good guys, Shark is now prone to sudden panicked actions, and Snake spends the entire movie focusing on his new girlfriend, Susan. Most, if not all of his interactions shifted from being Wolf's counterbalance to phone about Susan. At the same time, it feels like a waste due to some themes and moments that could have been developed, but also it shows a progression, a change, and his moments are quite funny, so I will leave you to judge. The characterization of the antagonists is also interesting. Kitty Cat is indeed a fan of Wolf, and this is shown more through her body language, how she keeps a close eye on him and mimics some of his mannerisms. But at the same time, she isn't even remotely on his league due to a lack of camaraderie and quick thinking. Whenever things escape her control, she gets viciously angry, stops mimicking Wolf, and immediately assumes that the heist is a failure. And an interesting tidbit is how lollipops are used to gauge her control of the overall situation. If a lollipop is in her mouth, she is in control. If control slips from her, she either loses the lollipop or it breaks. Doom is the professional of the trio, smooth talking and collected, but at the same time not expecting how bizarre things can get. And Pigtail is the burly brains. All three are more combat oriented than the bad guys, they aim higher, their execution is more professional, but at the same time they lack their cohesion and quick thinking. Their plan is actually simple and well done, and their execution, while cartoonish, does provide for a good climax. Okay, a brief pause. Just like Stellar Blade, my favorite things about this movie's plot, and the worst things about it, involve heavier spoilers, so I will point out one or two minor faults of the middle, talk in a generic way about the ending, and then hop to soundtrack, before properly talking about the spoilerific tidbits. The humor is still very much like the first movie, mostly slapstick, but also we have the crew reacting to some bizarre situations, mostly from Snake being utterly head over heels for Susan, and Piranha being the source of the fart jokes. There is some self-referential humor, like the main MacGuffin being called MacGuffinite, and characters pointing out how ridiculous this is. So, if you enjoyed the humor of the first movie, you enjoy it here again. Now, the second part of the movie treads smoothly with both teams trying to nail each other, with some splits and twists. Out of the non-spoilerific stuff that I can point out is that the writers missed a great chance for a good fight scene between Pigtail versus Shark teamed out with Piranha. Both are fighting for the wrestling belt, but in order to sell that Pigtail is an enormous threat, the whole team goes against her. And this bites back the plot later in a minor way. And when it's finally time for the team to talk about their issues, how life as civilians is miserable, they just exchange some words here and there and it's okay. No Snake challenging Wolf, no Wolf thinking about Diane, nothing. On one hand, cheap drama avoided, but on the other, so was characters being fleshed out. On the better side, this movie dodges a gigantic bullet. When trouble starts and Wolf calls Diane, there's the usual catching up banter happening before I hear her saying,
"You gotta believe me."
Of course I believe you.
It's so friggin' refreshing to see the narrative avoiding the dreaded forced drama of instant betrayal. And soon after, Foxington tries to reassure Wolf,
Yeah.
We'll get through this, okay?
which was far more in tone with the first movie's Diane. I really missed female leads being tender with male leads. Anyway, going on. The last leg of the movie shifts gears into something more akin to an old James Bond movie like Octopussy or Moonraker. Ask your grandfather. But honestly, that didn't bother me much. The transition between genres and styles was slow, properly introduced, and they kept things simple, with a nice payoff and a good joke at the end. So, while the first movie gave our protagonists more space to be their quirky selves, this one compressed such time in favor of more action. But if the previous one nearly broke its back due to twisting itself into a pretzel of plans within plans, this plot preferred to be simpler and more straightforward. There are still some cracks and a vicious bump that they repeated here, but the results were far better overall. It depends on your tastes if you prefer Napolitan or chocolate flakes. Action and character development separate but complementing each other, or some bits of character development in Flakes blended with the action. This movie is good and overall better. Soundtrack. This one will be all quite easy as well. The soundtrack continues to be just as good as the original, with a good blend of licensed music and original score. Due to the change in pacing, there are less noticeable effects of instruments following what's going on and character motions, but there is a bigger emphasis on the climaxes of the heists and action. This trend also follows the voice acting up to a point. Everyone from the first movie, every single person from the returning cast is just as stellar as they were in the first movie. Rockwell and Beats are still as terrific as before as Wolf and Diane, their voices also being one of the pillars of both characters' chemistry. I do appreciate that Mark Maron was still able to pull Mr. Snake, keeping the character's tone and style while he was basically in an entirely different direction. On the new characters, I have to admit that the voice actors of Kitty was meh. I'm not familiar with her style and material, so I wouldn't know if it was her or the directing, but to me, her voice felt detached from what was going on, with a limited vocal range. Not awful by itself, just normal, but compared to the stellar cast, it sticks out like a sore thumb. The VAs of Susan and Pigtail fared far better. Susan being the professional that slowly comes to realize the situation where she's in, and Pigtail being the gal that is absolutely enjoy every single second of what she does, be it working with or against her idols. Final thoughts. Yeah, this is a no-brainer, it's an easy recommendation. While the style and the recipe were changed, it's an improvement in everything of the original, but without replacing it. You watch the first one to see the bad guys as a family of miscreants learning to be good, and you watch the second one to see the good guys as an action team. So I completely recommend it. Spoilers. Phantom Bandit's plan is to steal a special rocket and with its power source power up a magnet that attracts gold and only gold. While there are some minor bumps here and there, I really liked how the plot dealt with nearly everything surrounding the rocket heist. So, getting to steps. Kitty needs the bad guys to be at a specific place in a specific way in order to be framed, so she may corner them and blackmail them with footage incriminating Diane. How she does that? By making one of her underlings, Susan, seduce Snake and bring him to a date at the spot of the robbery. Now, normally there would be a ton of what ifs, for example, what if the bad guys don't catch on? But the narrative actually covers these bases. First, the relationship has been going on for a while before the movie begins, so no sudden brainwashing like the previous flick. Susan had time to get into Snake's good graces and manipulate him from there, and then use him to bait the bad guys into a scene of the crime to frame them. Second, the narrative shows, and shows well, that Susan invited Snake for activities that happened right before robberies for a while as well, meaning there was time to let the bad guys catch on or not. And even if they didn't catch on, Kitty had the video to blackmail them. A really good jump in quality from the first movie. There are still some smaller problems. For example, when chasing the Phantom Bandit to a luchador event in order to prevent Snake from being arrested, the bad guys accidentally knock out Commissioner Luggins before they get into a fight and are framed. All they had to do to prevent the bandit from stealing the belt of the luchadores was to wake up the chief they accidentally knocked out after they found out that Snake was clear. Another smaller problem was when Tarantula nabs a video of Kitty talking about how she framed Wolf. Why didn't she just send the video through email to the chief right away? And how in blazes did Kitty got her pawns on a video of Diane revealing herself? Sure, I know this is a setup and a hook for another movie, but there is no way they'd have the records of the Crimson Pawn. One option could be the records of the first movie when she unmasked herself in the prison. Again, these are just minor problems that only pedantic asshole like me would get. What miffed me though was when it's time to Wolf to come clean about his insecurities of being a bad guy or a good guy, everything solved a bit too fast. It was the perfect moment for a heart-to-heart, especially with Snake right there. But still, the movie goes on balancing very well the absurdly cartoonish with the heroic and more serious. Everything about the rocket chasing sequence is absurd, bonkers and absolutely awesome, and I will not make or take any criticism. Also, I won't spoil it even here. Vinyasa, baby. This is the point where the movie jumps from being just pretty to downright gorgeous sometimes. The effects of the gold magnet hitting the earth, the gold being pulled and circling the planet, the explosion of the magnet itself, the studio really outdid themselves. It's filled with small details to the delight of keen eyes. And about the rocket itself, I really liked how the hypertech was used to simplify the heist, using the suspension of disbelief very well. Instead of making an overly convoluted plot to seize the rocket, all they have to do is steal a watch. It's the inversion of the first movie, where a simple plot about stealing money was overcomplicated, and everything is foreshadowed. You can see the rocket is announced by its owner in a well-done background event. Speaking of details, this is just another minor thing that can be hand-waved since this is a kid flick, but Jesus Christ, this movie has a gigantic implicit death toll. Just the rocket launch alone would kill anything that was inside a half-kilometer radius, more or less. And things get to astronomical levels when you think about how many people would get killed by the gold magnet. A giant gold magnet that affects the whole planet and is strong enough to make gold burst through glass screens and walls. Planes falling, all cell phones, gold teeth, just imagine it. Anyway, now on the biggest problem of the movie. It's not as vicious as the first one, but it is a repeated offender. Again, Diane is so overpowered that it messes the narrative, and again, it happens just like a stack of dominoes on a billiard set. So, Diane arrives at the scene of the crime, ready to stop the bad girls, and after a chunk of the movie established that Pigtail was a powerhouse by herself, remember she needed the whole team to beat her. Doom was nimble and Kitty could dent metal with punches. Diane wipes the floor with all of them. No, really, she only needs to hit Pigtail and Doom once each, they're down. And the worst she gets is a headbutt from Kitty before getting back and wiping the floor with her as well. Now, again, she can't fail, but the movie can't end right there. So what happens? Wolf has to up again. It's literally a repetition of what happened in the first movie, though done in a different manner. Kitty sets up a sadistic choice where Wolf has to choose between letting himself be captured or allow a video incriminating Diane to be leaked into the internet. The sadistic choice is a good moment. I really like it how it was done and how Wolf has to think on his feet. Except that he fails so bad, he gets captured and leaks the info on the internet. And exactly at the right moment to make the video go insta-viral, so Diane can be surprised by the video, lower her guard enough to receive a dart to the chest and fall. Meaning that for the purpose of the overall script, this whole convoluted scene was done just to make her not end the movie too soon. The writers didn't even need to make Wolf look like a putz, especially after he worked so hard. All it needed was to make Kitty lie about the sadistic choice, and regardless of Wolf escaping or not, she'd leak the video anyway to ruin Diane. Or someone pointing out that if Wolf had sacrificed himself and let the police arrive and arrest him, they would have found the evidence anyway. The cherry on top of this mess is that Diane literally loses everything she fought so hard for years, and besides the initial shock, she doesn't bat an eye. Nobody blames Wolf. Nobody gets mad. No one points out that everyone turning on Diane and free Marmalade without any sort of investigation cements the idea that people are self-serving bastards that will turn on you and will still keep judging you by appearances. Diane is shocked, gets knocked out, and after she recovers, it's back on action and doesn't seem bothered by it anymore. Sure, she finally can stay with Wolf, yes, but things could have been done in a different way, perhaps a bittersweet tone at least. Look, I'll have to be blunt on this one. Just let Diane fail. Let the trio of bad gals overwhelm her. Let Kitty be strong enough to take her head on. A character being beaten up and having to rethink her strategy doesn't diminish her. Much on the contrary, it makes even more awesome when they flip the odds and emerge victorious. I grew up seeing awesome fight ladies like Michelle Yeoh and Cynthia Northrock, and to me fights are even better and grittier if they dish as much punishment as they can take it. Because a hero that only dishes and never takes ends up boring, especially if all they have to do is 1 or 2 taps and the enemy is down. And again, it gets worse when the script diminishes everyone else to make a character shine. For example, all Wolf does in his fight against Kitty is run away, as if the narrative was absurdly afraid of letting him land a single punch on her for some reason. Yes, I know that his inspiration, Lupin, isn't a straight fighter either, but Lupin uses guns and uses guns well, and he can handle himself in a brawl. And why give Wolf a sparring scene with Diane as if he was starting to learn how to fight, only to have him absolutely beaten to a pulp? At best he manages a single judo throw to score one small victory. He steals Kitty's bracelet and activates the rocket to stop the Doomsday weapon. While it's actually nice and shows that he's still a master pickpocket, his victory can be considered moot since Diane arrives soon after to easily beat Kitty. And they could have just taken the watch from Kitty's unconscious body. Why not let Wolf and Diane pair up to beat Kitty, showing that he improved? Or while Diane keeps Kitty busy, he uses the watch. Teamwork makes the dream works. Project A final fight was awesome to see because the main villain was so hardcore he forced 3 people to join up to beat him. Showing a character struggling makes things easier for the viewer to connect with these characters and be inspired by them. So this mess wasn't as bad as the first movie's final stretch, nowhere as close, but it's clear that the writing still can't handle Diane. This may be ironed out in further projects or it can get worse, so please nerf her. Let her be sweet with Wolf without the friendly jabs. Let her do some more mistakes, be hit and be defeated. There are several ways to do so without diminishing her as a character. You can't properly establish a threat if your hero just steamroll over them. On the other hand, this means that they finally kiss.